How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I've got a very special guest for you all. He's a multi-sport strength athlete. He's competed in CrossFit, Strongman, weightlifting. He's a strength coach himself. Today, I am joined by the one and only Joey Szatmary. How are you?
Good, man. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Yeah, I'm all good. I suppose the first question is, how are you getting on? What's kind of been happening in your world recently?
Life's just really busy. I always think I'm going to have like a down season or downtime, and just the way that I operate, somehow I manage to make everything always very busy. But yeah, man, I run a small brick and mortar training space that I primarily train out of, and where people will see my videos. And then I have, either one-on-ones or group clients. Right now, I'm doing an athletic performance camp that I have every year with the athletes I work with. And then outside of that, man, I'm just a family man. So husband, father, we have our second son who's supposed to be due in just over a month. So it's crunch time, getting the house ready, everything in order to welcome him to our home. But outside of that, man, yeah, it's just trying to not wither away with my own training, which is always it's an adjustment period for me for sure compared to the past. But that's about it, man. Just having fun, enjoying the ride, and trying to stay as present as I can every single day.
Nice. And do you think, yeah, you'll probably get used to this, but I am partial to a tangent every now and again. I know obviously because a lot of my friends, people that I've worked with, they're having kids at the minute. You know, life is changing. What they were doing before couldn't happen. I literally spoke to one of my really good friends. I was organizing. I basically fly back to the UK soon, so organizing to kind of meet up with him. But before it was me and him either going training or going for a coffee. Now it's a case of we're going to go for a walk with his little boy and go for a walk, which I'm really looking forward to. But how have you kind of found that adjustment? Has it been like in terms of fitting everything in, still coaching, still training? Has it kind of been doing things if and when you can, or still trying to have some kind of structure? How have you kind of balanced that or tried to adjust to that?
Yeah, I think it's just been one big adjustment period, like when our son was first born, and you have to think of it like there's always different stages with a child, right? Like my first son, he's going to be two in October, so he's a little bit more along the way, but with each stage he's in, it looks different for me, if that makes sense, right? Like in the beginning where he was sleeping a lot, I actually had more time to train, and it was a little bit easier on my wife and I because he can't move, right? He's just laying there. You just have to feed him, take care of those necessities. So whether that was me going and training or doing little things throughout the day, I think that was a lot easier. In my head, I thought that was going to be probably the hardest part. Where then once now he's running around like crazy. So there's pros, not pros and cons, but it's just different, right? Where now I can do things with him that I couldn't do before when he was little, which is super fun and awesome. But equally, like my head's on a swivel, right? He's not sleeping as much, so it's going to narrow down, my training times or windows, and it's just one big crazy adjustment period. And I think the most challenging part is just how much is changing all the time, where it's not like, okay, I know, I have X amount of time to do this. It's like every day is something new, right? So I think for any new parents, because that's where I'm in, I can't speak to, having older kids at this time. But it's really just trying to navigate every single day and get used to that, where if you're not used to that, and I'm a pretty chill and flexible guy as it is. So for me to really be adjusting to this, that's a big change and difference. But at this point right now, it's trying to focus on what's the minimal requirements for me that I can feel good about and be happy with, and understanding that it's not going to look like what it once was at this time, and having to be okay with that, because if you're not okay with that, I think mentally that can really start to mess with you, going from training, and having almost zero responsibilities in that sense, that just like I would run my business and I would train, like that was it. Obviously, my wife and I, like she had work, so we would still, have our relationship and stuff. But we were talking the other day and we're like, the difference is now that there is this other human being who we are totally responsible for and, watching and, it's a very unique experience. And you're no longer, I don't want to say like living for yourself, but for me, it's like my family's my number one priority. So I really am living for them, where in the past it was more I had so much more free time, way less responsibilities. And then during that time, you don't even realize it. You have no idea like how much time and freedom you actually have. So it gives you, it's just a perspective that I think is so unique. It's wild. It's everything, everything all in one happening all the time. But yeah, man, I'm just trying to adjust to that. That's where my feet are at right now. It's in the past I used to have these really awesome, well laid out plans and I would execute them, where now it's, plan A, B, C, D, all the way to Z. And if I can land on one of them, that's a win, brother. That's where we're currently at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that you said there about being okay with it, because I think sometimes where people struggle is being like, no, no, I need to do this. Whereas if you've got this, little person that needs feeding or changing or wanting attention or anything like that, it's a case of look, you said there as well, what's kind of like the minimum that you can do, what can you get by doing, and being okay with it means that you're probably going to be able to not have as much stress in other areas rather than trying to control something that maybe is a little bit uncontrollable. I did quite a brief introduction at the start, but for everyone listening, and I know obviously you mentioned there about your coaching business and your own training, but for everyone listening who might not know your background in training, in coaching, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself, Joey.
Sure. This is always like I try to be as short as I can. Sometimes it goes longer, but I'll try to do it as briefly as I can. In the way back days, it's kind of funny. I people who would look at me now wouldn't probably know how I was when I was younger. I didn't get into sports till I was probably in like actual middle school, where I was starting to really pick up on things. I was a late bloomer in that regard. But before that, I was always kind of dabbling in like intramural sports, trying to figure out what I liked. So it would just be, like soccer, football, basketball, whatever. I didn't really drift towards one of those when I was young. So I really got into martial arts. So I did martial arts from the time I was probably like 6 all the way till I was like a teenager. And then it wasn't until my one buddy thought, because I was a bigger guy, he's like, you should go out for the football team and the lacrosse team. So I played both of those sports and I also wrestled. And I really started to gravitate towards football and lacrosse. I think now I wish I stuck with wrestling, but wrestling was weird because it was always between football and lacrosse. So
Right.
for me, I think it was just a lot, just of a time commitment. And I was still just trying to figure out, my strengths, my weaknesses. But I ended up sticking towards those, all throughout middle school and high school and did pretty well there. And I would say I went to college with a focus for lacrosse. And then after that, I got involved with CrossFit, kind of like to scratch that competitive itch. So I did CrossFit. I competed in CrossFit for a little bit, nothing crazy. Realized that I really like the Olympic weightlifting side of things, and anything that was short and intense versus, slow and long. I just really didn't like that stuff. So got more competitive into Olympic lifting. So in Olympic lifting, I've clean and jerked 450 pounds, whatever that is in kilos. I still freedom units over here.
Yeah,
And then snatched what's it, 345, as like so that was a pretty solid total for Olympic lifting. Then I actually had like a little knee injury, which kind of made me rethink, what am I doing with my training? And the thing about Olympic lifting is when it came to strength and explosiveness, man, like that was bread and butter. But I didn't really look the way I wanted to look, which is kind of funny when you look at Olympic lifters. Like you could see one of those guys or girls walking down the street and just, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but you kind of just look, maybe you look athletic, look fit, but you're not like, oh my gosh, this person's a freak. Now, when I look at people in the strongman world, I was like, yo, they look like a different level, in terms of physique and their strength and numbers and stuff like that. And it just looked fun what they were doing, either picking up these big stones and pulling these large vehicles and still deadlifting and doing these short, intense medleys. So that kind of perked my interest. And I got into strongman at the end of 2016, early 2017. And I just kind of got bit by the bug. So I was competing a lot to try a lot of the different events and implements. At that point, I was still super explosive. So I needed to work on my static strength, but I could do really well from my technique and just my athleticism. And I would say from 2016 all the way until last year, on and off, I was competing. So I've been on Team USA for the 105 class for strongman overseas. I've won a national championship in 2019 for 2 weight classes. I just have a lot of like local titles and records in that sport. So that's always been like a great community and something I've been passionate and loved and enjoyed. I suffered a really bad injury last year in my comeback strongman show for the 125 world competition. So just been recovering from that. And then outside of that, man, it's just I've been a high school lacrosse coach for 5 or 6 years now, and I do a lot of strength training for local high schools and athletes on top of, like I had mentioned, at one point I had a gym for about 8 years. I was a bigger public gym. I say it was public. It was more of like a club or private, I would say, but it was way bigger than what I have now. And then in 2023, I closed that, trying to figure out like where I wanted to take my career, just trying to do like a life audit, I guess. And probably the best decision I made personally, not knowing at the time, it was very difficult. But today, probably the best position I've ever been in terms of like my business, figuring out like who I want to serve and work with, which has just, been great for me. And like I said, now it's just trying to adapt to this new season of life, so you go from being like a world-class competitor to then thrown into where I'm at currently. And I wouldn't have it any other way. But I've really just tried to, adopt that growth mentality and use this as a challenge, with all the experience that I've had to get through this and not let it kind of crumble me or I want to, I guess not a bad, yeah, I guess not crumble me, but just like come out on top and use it as just a really, a big challenge to overcome right now. And, I'm doing the best I can. And I think by going through this, I've been able to learn a lot about myself, be able to be a better asset to the people that I work with and coach. And on top of it, it's been like a pivot, I would say, in the clientele that I've been working with because I know a lot more about who I am, when in the past, it was always just exploring and figuring out and working with so many people over the years, which is a necessary step for sure. But I'm 33 now, and I started this when I was like 18 or 19, which is kind of crazy. So there's a lot of in between there of people that I've worked with, all demographic, size, abilities, etc. But now I feel like I'm actually just starting to get cooking, because I've been able to take all of that knowledge and experience and just have a better foundation and understanding of who I am, who I want to serve, and how I can be the best coach and athlete moving forward for myself.
Nice, cool. I think a key word that you said there was experience. You mentioned you've got a podcast with Paul O'Neill a little bit later. Lucky enough to have him on the podcast as well, and we spoke about your identity, being comfortable with kind of like who you are, and I think over time, that keyword experience, having those experiences, learning from other people, situations, competitions, training, life events, all those sorts of things, to be able to then be like, do you know what, actually, like I'm happy with where I am now. Did you always, because you mentioned there about getting into sport maybe a little bit later, was coaching always something that once you started doing like the martial arts and everything, that you maybe wanted to get into coaching a little bit more, or was that something that kind of happened like naturally, or what was the plan around coaching?
Yeah, so I mean, looking back on my life, I've always been somebody who likes to get better at things, right? Like I wasn't a natural born athlete, yeah, I probably have genetic predispositions that now I can leverage, but I didn't, come out being like, this is really what I want to dive into. I just kind of immersed myself in the pursuit of getting better, whether that was with my martial arts, whether that was sport, whether that was school. Like I had to reframe my brain on like how can I beat this game or how can I get to that next level. So it's always been kind of a process for me. But within that process and looking back, I feel like I've always either intentionally or unintentionally got put more into leadership roles, right? So I was either trying to help other people or teach other people things just because there's something I was interested in, or people would seek, what I was doing and I would help them along the way. So that was kind of subconsciously probably always there, like on my sports teams, I always became like a captain, or like some sort of leadership position. And then fitness was always something that I was really passionate about and always enjoyed, whether it was to help with the sport or just for my mental health, it was just kind of like my escape and my release. And then when I was in college, I was actually going to college for criminal psychology, and I was trying to get a government job eventually, and had this image in my brain of what my life was going to look like. And kind of just got to a fork in the road of like, where do I want to take things? I was kind of unsure and uncertain of if I wanted to go down that career. Why was I wanting to go down that career? Was it for me? Was it for other people?
Yeah.
So kind of pumped the brakes there. And I got a nice opportunity from a local family friend who was starting their own more like boutique style gym at the time, where at this time, this is probably like 2012, 2013-ish. And you basically had like CrossFit gyms, you had big franchise commercial gyms, and there weren't many of like these smaller style training gyms popping up. And they were one of them. So I was asked if, I wanted to be a coach or a trainer at this place. And that was really where I started getting my feet wet in this whole journey of coaching and working with people. And then from there, it was really just something I enjoyed. I was passionate about. I thought that I could really dive into it. I started doing YouTube videos, and this is a time where making YouTube videos I don't think was a cool thing, especially when you're trying to tell, your parents or your grandparents who were born in like the 50s, like, hey, I'm gonna, be a personal trainer and I'm gonna make YouTube videos. Like now it's crazy to see like where the space is now, but back then it was very scary. You people didn't probably have a lot of faith in me to get to where I'm at now. But I'm really glad I stuck with it. And at the core base of it all is just I love helping people, man. Like if it's with fitness or just having conversations where I know that somebody is going to feel better or take something away from it that's going to help them. It's always been about service, and I'm by no means the best at this, and I have my flaws like 100%. But I think everybody that I've worked with just knows that I really freaking care, despite all those flaws. So for me, it's just become my vehicle to helping others. Has been through, physical, mental transformation from training and helping people achieve their goals and realize their potential. So I feel like if you can do that in any regard, in any occupation, it's fulfilling, and at the end of the day, I think if you can do something that it's fulfilling and you have purpose, that's fantastic, whether that's your main job or your side hustle. I think that's very important to kind of get through this journey we call life, and feel good about it, right? Like how many people go through their day to day and don't like what they do and they're not fulfilled, and it doesn't matter how much money you make or don't make. It's like at the end of the day, we want to be able to feel fulfilled. We want to feel loved. We want to be able to do that for others. And I think that's kind of the secret sauce. So long story long, man. That's just kind of how we got to where we're at. And yeah, coaching has just been something that I enjoy for those reasons.
Yeah. I think two things from there. First thing, you're actually the third person in the space of like a week and a half who has studied or has done something with criminal psychology. Two people came over to the fitness camp, and I was like, I can't believe I've never spoken to anyone who's done that before, and you're the third person on there. So I was like, when you said it, I was like, I've literally spoken to two other people that have that have done that. But yeah, then the other side of it, that thing of showing members, clients, athletes that you care. I think the phrase is nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I might have butchered that
Mhm.
quote there a little bit, but just that investment and, genuinely wanting to help, genuinely wanting to have the best for them so that they can help achieve their goals is, yeah, it's a good feeling from a coach's point of view to see them go from like one point to another or see how they change as a person. Yeah, I know I find that really, really rewarding. Going on to kind of like the main questions or the topics that I had in mind for the episode. I know we've spoken a little bit there, but one thing that you've said is obviously, helping people, and from your experience of, competing, coaching, and you mentioned it there of, looking and seeing what a weightlifter look like compared to like a strongman or anything like that. And um when you're working with your clients and your athletes, I suppose people have a picture in their head of what strength is, what strong is, and they kind of affiliate that to be, strength is being a strongman, strength is being a power lifter, or anything like that. Whereas sometimes for maybe the general population, they're not maybe exposed to kind of competing in strength. They just maybe want to look stronger, feel stronger, and have confidence with that. So quite a broad topic, but how do you kind of or what would you say is like what does getting strong look like? What does being strong look like when people come to you and say, look, do you know what? Actually, I want to be strong. Is there kind of like an underlying thing there where they maybe want to just be more confident in the gym or outside of the gym? What does that kind of look like to you? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a nuanced topic for sure, right? I guess the longer I've been doing this, I think it's getting to the deeper root of things for different people, right? So, um, you can have somebody who wants to become a specific strength sport competitor. Well, then we know, right, what qualities and attributes we need to fulfill that role. So that's going to look different than, like you said, if I'm dealing with like a Gen Pop client who may say those things. Well, then for me, it's figuring out deeper questions, talking to them more. Like, yeah, maybe you want to look the part, but why do they want to look the part? Is it something to do with their relationship with their spouse, or is it that they want to be capable? And I always say, like, capable is like my new thing. I know it's a catchphrase, but I do believe in it in the sense that you want to be prepared for almost anything at any time when life throws things at you. And that strength and training looks different than what I would do for a pro strongman or pro strongwoman or a CrossFitter or an endurance athlete, right? And one thing that I've been starting to ask myself is, instead of like the right in your face things like, okay, I want a bigger chest, I want bigger biceps. Well, it's more like, what do I want my body to be capable of doing? Right. And what do I need to train for my body to do those things? And typically, from doing those things, I'm going to develop some sort of physique that's going to support that role. Right. And usually, based on what people tell me, is then we can fine tune what the training is going to look like. And that starts to mold that physique that they probably had in their head. But we need to really figure out, like, what are the deeper reasons for the training, and not just the stuff on the surface. So for me, I like to peel back layers, especially with the clients I work with, when I do my consultation calls, or just get to know them. You really start to pick up little details, whether it has to do with their confidence or something that happened in their life, or where they're currently at versus where they were in the past. So I think for a lot of people, it's trying to get more clarity on the depth of what you're saying on the surface level and peel back those layers. And then we can really start to, design the program around those goals. But it looks different for everybody, like, for example, like I said, right now I have a sports performance camp, right? That main thing is driven so that they are better at their sport when they get on the field. A lot of those kids, when I start working with them, they think it's like bodybuilding, right? Because they want to put on the muscle, and they're following stuff on social media. But I have to sit down and ask them, I'm like, are you trying to be a better athlete and work on your performance on the field? Or do you just want to look the part? because those are different things, and then when I can get them to kind of answer those questions and understand where I'm coming from, you get more buy-in and it's easy for them to follow that program. Yes, strength is a component of athletic performance, but that's not everything that we need to be putting our eggs into that basket for, right? There are other components of that. Now, when I deal with my adults that I have, their training looks different because they're just trying to stay healthy for everyday life. They're focusing on injury prevention. And yeah, they want to probably get stronger. It's a benefit and a perk if they get stronger, and they usually do. But we're not going to train them for max absolute strength like I would with like a power lifter, or even train them like an athlete. We'll have components of that because I think as you get older, I especially getting injured, when I did, it kind of made me really reflect on, okay, there's some things that I've neglected along the way to get really, really strong. But if I get hurt and I was really, really strong, but now I'm hurt, I can't even show that strength. Right. So it really all depends on the context and who I'm working with and what that looks like. But I think that's the beauty of what I do, and that's what makes it fun and interesting for me is I get to problem solve a lot, where maybe if I just was focusing on one demographic and everybody's always talking about, the niche, and like I do have my niche for sure. But equally, I'm still in that white belt mentality of like always trying to learn and take things from my own experiences or what I've noticed anecdotally with my clients. And, it makes it always just this ever-going problem-solving equation. I can just get a little bit faster sometimes at solving it based on those experiences. But yeah, I'm not really sure if I answered your question the way you wanted me to answer it.
No,
Because
no.
I just think I think it can be definitely nuanced. So if there's like something in specific you want to dive deeper into, we can. But yeah, I think that's like one big thing that I've been noticing, especially with my own journey, is like, yeah, I would love to have a certain physique, right? But is that physique going to actually get me those goals that I'm striving for? Which they can be conflicting at times, but I do think that there's a way that you can make both work to some degree, right? Like you can't fill all the buckets and have huge return, but I do think you can still periodize things properly to be well-rounded. And I think a lot of people come to me now more than ever because I've been better at figuring out who I want to work with, but I really try to develop more of a well-rounded approach now to things, which is like you're still going to be pretty dang strong. You're still going to look the part. You're going to be more resilient to injury, and you're going to be able to move because that's become really important, for myself and the people that I work with. Is I've gotten to a point where it doesn't matter how jacked and strong I am. If I can't move, like a lot of that ends up not mattering, or it can be flip the switch really quickly if I go outside and I slip on something on my back deck and I, core strain something because all I've been doing is working in the sagittal plane for the last several years, and I've never put myself into a different multi-directional movement pattern, stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. No, I thought that was you covered quite a lot of bases there, and I was kind of nodding along as you go. And a couple of points that I took out from that is the first thing is, everybody's different, and you said there in terms of your initial consultation. I think sometimes people think, oh, does that mean that it's gonna be a test? They're gonna make me do this, this, and this. A lot of the time, it can be a conversation of just digging a little bit deeper. Oh, I want to be able to do this. Or why is that? Why is you thought about that? Why is that the first thing that you would mention from there? Having a conversation and then matching things from there. And I really like what you said about being capable. So why is it that you want to be strong? Because I am a big believer in that, yes, strength, however you want to wrap it up in terms of what you're doing, it does have a carryover outside. Like if you feel strong, feel physically strong, I think you're going to, and strength is relative to the person. It can give you that little bit of confidence to be able to, deal with different situations or anything like that because they've maybe done, a hard thing in the gym. Trying to dive it into a little bit more of that being capable. Why do people want to be strong? Sometimes there's a case of maybe not understanding how do they get started, so people maybe sometimes gravitate towards machines Machines 100% have their place, but just be like, right, I'm going to be able to do that. But then their goal might be to be able to play with their kids, be able to be a little bit active as they get as they get older, and they gravitate towards machines, or they Google a strength workout, and then all of a sudden they're following a bodybuilding program and they're doing chest on the Monday, back on the Tuesday, all things that I've done similar things to myself. When I first started going to the gym and being like, yeah, I'm just going to do loads of arms in the gym, but how do you kind of dig a little bit deeper, or what would you say to those people who are maybe lacking a little bit of understanding of where do they start with strength training? Because a lot of gyms, a lot of people will go to the like main big gyms, rows and rows of machines and those sorts of things, and kind of not be using the program that wants to make them capable for what they want to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think once again, it just comes down to the understanding of, okay, what are their goals? Are they either training in line with their goals, right? And as a coach, that's where I have to kind of be more of the guide and the mentor and explain to them, hey, I love that you're doing machines. Like you said, there's a time and a place for them. But we have to understand, if you want to be able to move better, well, are you doing anything that's mimicking the movement patterns that you want to get better at, right? And it's like, if they tell me I'm just doing machines, kind of doing more of a hypertrophy style training session, then it's explaining to them, okay, that's fine. And we can figure out how to incorporate that if that's what you enjoy, and what's going to keep you motivated. But can we add in, maybe a little bit more body weight movement patterns that are going to expand your palate, add more tools to the toolbox? How's your cardiovascular, strength, and what level are we at there, right? Because if you tell me that you want to be able to play with your kids, well, I know, and I thought I was one of those guys where I was like, oh, I hear all the time where these kids are going to be running around, and I'm like, I can handle that, dude. But I'm like, I didn't have a kid who was running around all day long, and realizing like how much of a demand that can actually be. So yes, it looks good on paper or in my brain, but I do need to increase my cardiovascular capacity, just to not only for my own health, but to be able to keep up with the pace of my child. And on top of that, if you watch a kid, they don't just run forward and backwards. They run all over the place, different directions. So, to me, it's asking that client, if that was their goal, like, well, can you shuffle side to side, right? If I told you to, could you run straight and then make a turn without that kind of giving you this feeling of anxiety or a pit in your stomach, where maybe you think you can, and I want you to just go and try that super easy and tell me how it went. Like, uh like, do we have a little bit of a delusion of where we're currently at, right? Like, that's a real one as well. And I face that. There's times where, like I said, I've neglected movement patterns. I took being an athlete for granted, where I thought I could milk it way longer than I could, with kind of easing the brakes on it. And my mind's like, oh, I could do that. And then I go to do it, and I either watch it or I feel it, and I'm like, that did not look or feel right. So I think sometimes it's a humbling experience for people. Even when I start to work with people, I try to come at the approach of like, I'm not trying to kill you or gas you. I think some people think that and want that. I come at it as a very systematic approach of, I want you to almost feel like I'm holding you back, because for me, compliance is the science long term. I want you to be motivated to show up. I want our training program to be in line with those goals. I want you to be on the same page. And that's a step-by-step process. It's not going to happen overnight. So yeah, I think it really just comes down to clarity between the coach and the client or athlete you're working with, and trying to see in their mind, like, do they add up? Do they not add up? And how can we bridge that gap by still keeping some of the things that they really like and enjoy in there? Because at the end of the day, I could write out the perfect program on paper. But if you just don't like the movements, or you're not enjoying it, well, then we're probably doomed to fail at some point. So I
Yeah.
have to meet people halfway, and then systematically sprinkle in little things at the proper progression so they don't mess themselves up. And then we're in an even bigger problem. But then just kind of build off that. So as a coach, I'm a very collaborative coach. I always say that on my consultation calls that I do with people. Like, I want input from them. I'm going to bounce ideas equally. You know, at the end of the day, we're going to do what I think is best, you know, in from my professional side of things. But I don't think it's this like, here's what I'm giving you, and this is what you're doing. And if you're not happy with it, well, that's your fault, right? Like, and I think some people can kind of get dogmatic about training and their backgrounds. And that's for me where it's a blessing and a curse to kind of be as well-rounded as I can be. But when it comes to being able to help, especially most Gen Pop people who, or people who come from maybe a competitive background and now they're kind of not really knowing where to go, I think that's where I can really excel, because I can look at the deeper aspects of certain programming or styles of training, and I can simplify them, right? Like that's a big thing for me is simplification for the people that I work with, um, and giving them the best bang for their buck and being as efficient as possible, you know, towards their goals. So that's kind of where I'm at today. And I do think that's the benefit of being as well-rounded as I can see, you know, benefits from the Olympic lifts or plyometrics or athletic movements, or, you know, if we're just talking about just strength training or you know, bodybuilding, hypertrophy stuff. Um, there's a way that you can implement certain parts of those training at a very simple level to still have a huge ROI for the clients. And you don't necessarily have to commit all to one, unless that's like, once again, you have your competitive athletes that want to do that, that's fine. But for the Gen Pop person, I think there is definitely a way that you can be super well-rounded in a very simplistic manner. And usually that develops really awesome physiques, you know, and then you sprinkle on the nutrition side of things because we know that that's a big component of it. Um, but when, you know, when they're ready to do that, for sure, it all works synergistically. But I think sometimes people overcomplicate a lot of things, or they can be slightly delusional, you know, with their desired, you know, outcomes. And for me, that's where I need to step in and be able to solve those problems.
Yeah, yeah. A couple of things from what you've said there. I think when you're talking about having speaking to that person and being, trying to fill all the buckets. I think sometimes people want to be like, right, I'm only going to be able to do this. And the other thing that you said there, which rung in my head, is that when people are looking at like the strength training side of things, because it goes back to what we said at the start, you being able to speak to those people from your experiences, not just competing in other sports, but from your own training of there, because you've got a bank to fall back on to be like, right, okay, so I tried this, I tried that, I maybe neglected a little bit of this, and I need to do that a little bit more when it comes to the strength side of things. And um people see just sometimes a snapshot of competitive athletes, and they just see them on the platform at weightlifting. They just see them at the world's strongest man, playing the events, thinking that's all they do. So they kind of just go down that avenue because maybe they think that that's the only thing that's got that person to there. So do you think there's maybe a misunderstanding or kind of wanting to just be focused at being strong rather than all these elements over here in terms of mobility, in terms of like cardio, power, all those sorts of things, that they actually everything like strength is going to have a little bit of a knock-on effect on power, cardio is going to have a knock-on effect on strength, be able to do more work. And then do you think that's where people end up either picking up injuries or just end up being kind of like a bit of a robot, and turning the whole body to turn to look to somebody rather than being able to like just rotate and have a look? They kind of just think, strength is the only thing, so I don't need to worry about anything else.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can use myself as an example. You know, when I kind of got out of college doing the CrossFit Olympic lifting thing, I had a super athletic base, right? I really wasn't getting injured because I was well-rounded. I was doing a lot of those movements and different level movements and mobility and all that kind of stuff integrated. But what I was lacking was more of the static strength side of things, right? So when I started to push the static strength up, then I saw progress there, and I still had a solid base when it came to like aerobic capacity, my explosiveness, that type of thing. But there, like I said, there became a point where I just kept trying to get stronger and stronger and stronger, but those other things were starting to fall to the wayside. So with that, I do think you're putting yourself at some sort of potential injury risk if you don't handle those other attributes because they all work together, just like you said, right? Like if I'm purely statically strong at certain lifts, that's a specialty. Okay. So in order to also do that, depending on if it's, multiple reps or one rep, right? Like where does your cardiovascular level need to be to execute and demonstrate that strength, right? Like if you are strong enough, but you just don't have the aerobic capacity, well, then we need to increase the cardio, right? Or say you're trying to do higher reps and you just can't, you start to get winded and then you start to break down your form because you're fatigued. Well, then we can put ourselves in a position for injury. So I quote this because I heard it from Broderick Chavez, who owns Team Evil. I don't know where he got it from or if he coined it, but periodization shall set you free. Like that's a big one for me now, right? Where instead of looking necessarily at like the next couple months, well, how about we look at 1 to 2 years? And I know that sounds like a lot, but I think we need to be able to pull back and systematically break down what our whole training year or long-term goal is going to look like. One of the questions I ask when I do this consultation calls is what, and I try to say this to them and like, give me like the raw answers that come to your head right away. It's like in 12 months, what do you want that version of you to look and feel like? Like 12 months from now. And then and even me or you probably puts this image in our head of like what we'd want to look like, what that feels like, how we're moving, right? And then that's kind of where I can start to backtrack because if we know the end goal, right, how are we going to build this machine over the next 12 months or more to be supportive of that end goal? And it's not always just going to be static strength. It's not always going to be cardio. It's not always going to be mobility or athletic, components. But there's going to be times where we're turning dials up on certain parts of that training or attributes of that training, and where some stuff's going to be kept at a maintenance level or more priority. So I think when you can start to do that, and I now lay these plans out for my clients, which is cool for them to see, it's cool for me to see because we have a map and we now can start our voyage where a lot of people just see some sort of destination, put the pin there, and we have no plan of action. And typically that's where we are program hopping, we're getting injured, we're just not getting the results that we want. So that's where I do think there's the value, and especially having and being a coach, is because that's where we can really excel and help guide people. And once you have that buy-in from them, great things are going to happen. But yeah, if you turn the dial on anything that ends up in an extreme, part of that spectrum, typically that's not healthy, right? Like anything that is too extreme is costing you somewhere else, and it's only a certain amount of time that you can put that pedal to the metal or turn that dial before something else starts to spike or react. And that's where we're kind of in the danger zone, with what you would call some sort of problem, whether that's injury or something going on, physiologically in the body, mentally, right? Like if you're competing, right? Talk about competing like nonstop all the time, day in and day out. That's a mental stress, right? Like we get into things and we love it and we're fired up, we're motivated. But there comes a point, I think, for anybody where that's all you know, or then you have this identity crisis, which we've talked about. So you really have to look at it from a long-term perspective and really get to know yourself, know the client, what's their personality like. That plays a big role too. Like what kind of personality they have, which could dictate, types of programming that you're going to do. So yeah, once again, this is kind of more philosophical stuff, and hopefully I'm answering your questions the way you'd like. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
man,
think
that's kind of like my take on it.
yeah, I think with that, like what we said at the start, people can Google, Chat GPT, a program and be like, I want to get stronger. And there will be program on Google on out there, and it's like if you follow that, you will probably will get stronger. But being just using one keyword doesn't take into account how you want to feel. So it might be a case you got to do this, and this exercise, but it's a case of you've got poor shoulder mobility, you've got poor rotation, you've got a really physical job, you've just got a newborn baby. Those other things aren't going to take into a contact from there. So I think sometimes, especially from conversations that I've had with clients, with people that come into the gym, they have an idea of what that looks like. And like what you mentioned there, if you say to somebody, what does that look like in maybe a year's time, or what does that end goal look like to you? People have that vision in their head. Whereas what I liked what you said there was it's actually a journey rather than, again, going back to what you said at the start, having all those buckets is just like one destination. Right, let's fill this bucket up first. Cool, let's now try and fill the other bucket up. Whereas actually, you can keep that balanced. I always like to think of it like a dial on like a DJ board. You like moving the pieces all the time, because depending on where you are in, yeah, life, sometimes you're going to be able to push strength a little bit more. Sometimes you're not going to be able to do as much as that. When it comes to, because one thing that you were saying there in terms of like not so much how strength looks, and that vision that they have, but you also mentioned their feel. Now, when speaking more about the general population, when they come in and speak with coaches, sit down, have the consultation, it's never usually one thing. It's once you dig a little bit deeper, they have more of a meaning behind it, which is like the main reason. But usually it's a case of, yeah, I want to get a little bit fitter, a little bit stronger, lose a little bit of fat. There's usually a couple of things from there. Whereas in their head, they have an idea of it's just this one thing that I need to do. Whereas I've had conversations with people, or people will be like, well, if I try and do everything all at once, will I actually achieve anything? Will it put them at greater risk of injury? Whereas actually, like what you've said there in terms of that periodization, it's not a case of like you're doing 3 hour sessions where you're going to do a full power session, then you're going to go straight into power, and then straight into 4 days of cardio. It's doses of everything structured around that person. Do you think that's where maybe people go wrong, and they only focus on one thing rather than, looking at this program and be like, look, we do have a little bit of power, we have a little bit of this, and then those small exposures over time are going to allow to build that, rather than being, oh, if I'm doing power, I need to do like just one full power session, and then people get stressed with trying to cram everything in, as opposed to working with a coach and having it laid out for them and be like, this is the correct approach to do. Yeah, I spoke quite a lot there, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I have had this realization, and all right, it's funny. Little tangent before we get into it, because I know you said you like tangents.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the first thing is the training arc is so interesting, right? Where you start off with these basics that you're doing, and you're getting all these results, and then you kind of hit a plateau, and then you have to get more advanced and more complex, and especially in the world we live in, there's so many different training styles and fads. And I've actually got to the point where I'm old enough to see things start to circulate in and out that were from the past. Like you hear about it, but now it's like, damn, like I'm actually living in that time where I remember when this was a thing and now it's coming back. But then you get to where I'm kind of at now, where you start going back to the basics. And it's like you have this knowledge where you can filter out all the more advanced stuff, and there's certain key components or elements you may keep, but then you come back full circle and you're like, dude, like I'm doing the stuff that I did when I started, but it's just a little bit different. And I feel like that's a great spot to be at. And to build off what you were saying, the realization that I've had is just how adaptable the body is. Like I think we get so fixed when we look at programs, and we're so worried about like too much volume or too much intensity, and we get so into the weeds of it, which is like, yes, you have to understand some of the bigger general concepts of those, but equally, like you said, if I would rather do 10, 15 minutes of cardio, sprinkled like every other day, maybe it looks a little bit different, which is way more manageable, and my body will adapt to that over time, and I'll have a really great ROI on just doing that versus like the once a week hard blast for like an hour or something like that. And even when it comes to exercises, like me being as busy as I am and working with the clients I do, it's like, okay, what's the best bang for our buck? Maybe you think you need 6 exercises. Honestly, like three, you could get away with 3 really good exercises, spread, a couple times throughout the week where you're really focused, you have high intention, high intensity. And you're picking the proper exercises versus getting caught up in a lot of like the little stuff, which, so it's sometimes is less is more, but sometimes less and more can be better too. You know what I mean? Like instead of thinking the all or nothing principle, if I can't get this hour and a half, 2 hour session in, like I'm just going to bag it. I need that time. It's like, no, like you can actually get a lot done in 45 minutes if you have the proper coach or you do, your own homework and you can kind of wean out the fluff. And at the end of the day, if it came down to me having a client where it was, like I said, everything perfect on paper. Maybe those sessions were like an hour to 2 hours long, but they just couldn't sustain that, or they were just doing like one hard day of cardio versus somebody who maybe trained 3 or 4 times per week. They do a little bit of cardio either on their training session or their off days for like 10, 15 minutes. Maybe they have a little bit of feeder workouts in between where it's just like, doing some wrist curls here and there. Like I'd rather have that across a long period of time versus somebody who like goes all in and then kind of like crashes and burns out because it just wasn't sustainable, or they were trying to do, too much of the wrong things, if that makes sense. So I do feel like there's a way that, once again, yeah, it's this weird paradox or dichotomy of like less is more, but sometimes more can be better, but it's less of that thing sprinkled more frequently. If that makes, did you
Yeah, I
follow me
get that.
there?
Yeah, yeah. It's that phrase of I'm a big fan of that phrase, be consistently good rather than occasionally great. The
100%.
the phrase of that because and why I thought this is an interesting topic is I think I say this quite a lot, but we're in an age where we can get everything relatively quickly. Anything we want, we can get it really quickly. I was actually having a conversation the other day about again a little bit of a tangent, but in theory, people don't have to leave their house. They can get food delivered. There's Netflix. You can watch TV there, watch whatever
Crazy.
you want. Yeah, I'm sure you could even buy a subscription and exercise at home and not leave or anything because it's next day delivery, same day delivery, got everything from there. And I think there is a phrase, same as like I'm actually training a guy. He works quite a lot with AI, and he was explaining to me like the difference in speed. What would take like a human being to be able to do this, he can do it in like less than half the time
Crazy.
which because I always joke and say I knew Terminator was a documentary, not just not just a film. But yeah, with those things, it's a case of in fitness, strength and conditioning, I want everything and I want everything right now. Whereas actually, when you're saying there, zoom out a little bit, have that bird's eye view. What does like that year look like? All right, cool. So we're not going to spend as much time doing power here. We're going to do a little bit more of that because going back to what you said about playing sport, before I competed in powerlifting, I played quite a lot of rugby. And sometimes it's a case of when we had our program, or even when I was doing strength and conditioning with rugby teams, it's a case of what does that year look like? Like we don't want to be pushing strength all season because
Mhm.
then you've got stress of games on a weekend. It's the same as in life. If you're just pushing strength all the time, you might have a really busy social calendar. You might have a really busy work calendar. All those things are gonna impact from there. Do you kind of agree with that? Is it a case of everyone wanting everything now rather than taking that approach?
Yeah, well, I mean, 100%, man. It's like as much as you want to have it all right now, it's like you can't, but I can show you a way that you can eventually get there. It's just going to take time, consistency, and hard work. And I do think in today's world, that's it's tough, right? When everything is so quickly accessible, and you mentioned all those other things, but if you want to take another set to it too, like drugs, man, like whether like drugs now, like they're coming out with drugs in the future that essentially you could probably, or we will get to a point where you can choose to go to the gym or not go to the gym, and it would still almost be the exact same thing. If you want to take a certain drug that gives you the muscle and has the physique that you want, and develops the same physiological components of going to the gym, like that's a wild thing that we have to consider. Now, the difference is showing up to the gym every single day is building character, and it's building discipline, and it's building habits that I think doing those drugs, probably can't or won't do to the level of you actually doing the damn thing. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And that's like, I guess, where it makes me a little bit different as a coach is when you look at social media or training, like I've been around long enough to see people and what they do and the trends and how they work. And like for me, it's like I'm going to stick around until the day that I die doing this. So I have this long-term vision. I'm not worried about it. Where other people, you're going to see them have these crazy highs and have their moments, and then they're going to burn out and fade away. So I am more rooted on like my long-term vision and plan for sure. And the other thing that I want to talk about based on things you said, and something that I've been really working on myself that's been a huge game changer for me, is building systems, right?
Yeah.
Systems are huge, right? So it's like, and I do that for my clients where, yes, if this is what, like, it looks perfect on paper, you agree, you're cool, we can do this. What happens when life throws the curveball in your face? What are you going to do? Because if you don't have these systems in place, like I talked about earlier, A, B, C, or D, we're probably just going to crumble because we don't have that plan, and we're going to push it off to tomorrow or next week, when every now and then that's okay. But if we look at like the sum of those days, where's the net gain, out of all this? Are we having positive growth, or are we plateauing? And that's what I find with most people is like they yo-yo because they go all in for a certain period of time. They get these great results, motivation's high, they can stick to it, but they don't have the proper systems in place for the sustainability. So for me, it's like if I have these clients that I work with, who have all these different schedules or things pop up, that's where I can kind of show them like, hey, maybe we don't have time for an hour to an hour and a half session. Okay, well, if that happens here in your program, I have labeled the priority, right? The secondary, and then like can scrap if you don't have time to do this. So now it's like, okay, hey, I'm going to go in instead of me thinking I have to get all this done today. As long as I hit these 2 or 3 big things, I can feel good about it. Coach feels good about it. And then I can move on to the next day. Or, hey, we have this optional session at the end of the week. Put the crap you missed in there if it happens. And if not, don't worry about it because we already hit the main basics that we need to. So that's kind of the way I've been molding and shaping my programming for myself and the clients that I work with, which not to be whatever, like people have been loving it, because it's like they have this relief because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. There's pressure between the coach and the athlete. Like, I don't want to disappoint him. Well, it's like, how can you disappoint me if I set you up with these options that you can't fail?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that's a big one that people miss out on. And it's just, once again, a little bit goes a long way. It's just like your savings account, man. Like $50, every month doesn't seem like a lot, but over 10 years, hey, $50 a month, you're probably, glad that you did that versus not. So I look at those investments as the same with, what's the minimal barrier for entry and what's the minimal barrier for stimulus required for either maintenance or actually adaptation. And I think it's far less than people assume in their head. Sometimes it may feel like when you're training, you're actually not like you're not pushing as hard as you need to. And that's another misconception when in actuality, that's where I do like the science of it is we know that that's fine, and you have to kind of reframe your brain to realize that. And I think it's just a big mental reframe because when you look at, once again, the things you said, social media, ChatGPT, it can really warp your perception when it comes to training and aesthetics or what's possible. So that's really where I feel like in this age of tech, especially, and all these things, the human connection and human experience of coaching can never be replaced by that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think with that there, the systems I completely agree with. And I try and, word it as giving people a choice. Whereas, we've kind of touched on quite a lot of things there, and, people thinking strength is the only thing that they need to do. If you're doing powerlifting, for example, you should only be doing powerlifting. Whereas actually, relative to what your goals are, adding a little bit of cardio will help. Will help. Having that choice of look, if number one priority from this, and giving them a little bit of, it goes back to what you were saying about that journey. It gives them that direction. Whereas sometimes if it's a case of nope, you've just got to walk in a complete straight line, do not deviate, just got to go there, you're going to run into obstacles, you're going to run into barriers that you're going to get stuck at. Whereas it's like, all right, well, actually, let's take a left here, let's go down this route, let's see what that is. And everything that you've said there, even though or everything that you've said throughout this chat, is yes, the goal might be, the underlying thing that we've been speaking about is, how do we get people stronger and get to that end goal? But there's lots of other avenues to go off. There's lots of other things to think about to be able to go from there. Yes, the programming side of things, like what we've said, you can Google that, have a look at that, but it's kind of how do you then create that system to that person to allow them to get stronger? What are the weak points that need bringing up? What they want to do from there? More so, I know we've been speaking for the to the kind of like general population there, but then it opens up things of yeah, actually, I do want to compete in powerlifting, I want to compete in weightlifting, I want to keep in strongman because you've kind of built that base. Quite a lot of topics and tangents thrown in there, Joey. But the last question that I like to ask is for everyone listening, what would be your take home points or words of wisdom from what we've chatted about today?
Oh man, there's probably a lot of them. I would say take home points. Tr- Yeah, first try to really identify what your goals are. And that stems from knowing your priorities. A lot of people I feel like don't actually know or have a clear picture of what their main priorities are. And do they match up? Right? That's the first question you got to ask and be real with yourself. And if you don't know, have a coach, get on a call. I think it's worth it that can be a big problem solver in and of itself of the conversation. And also try to figure out like the periodization of your life and your training goals is a big one, right? And those are seasons. And I think a lot of people try to continue seasons that are over, right? It's like if summer's done and winter's coming, why are you still wearing shorts and a t-shirt, dog? Like we got to get our winter gear out, right? So I think people can be resistant thinking that they're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting that different result. We know that's the definition of insanity. But we still do it. I still do it, right? So it's kind of getting real with yourself there, and getting more clarity on the definition of what you think certain things mean. Like you're saying strength a lot in this podcast. Well, what is that client's definition of strength,
Yeah.
right? Like that is going to bring a lot of clarity to them, making sure that they're on the right path towards their goals, right? Because they could be thinking that strength means increasing my bench press, but your goals are telling me that you need to be able to put your groceries from the floor overhead. Well, that strength level is going to look completely different. And once they realize that, right, that's a big win for them because they now don't have the pressure of thinking, oh, I'm tied to this number, this metric, which I always say you're one day closer to your next PR and your last PR. So for me, it's about building that lifestyle. So anybody listening to this, it's how can I make this and integrate this as a lifestyle and have the adaptability and flexibility for the long haul, right? And sometimes if you don't have the means to do that, that's why having a coach is huge. And I don't know, I can keep riffing, dude, because I'm just in this like very philosophical place with my own training and just reflecting on a lot of my own experiences. Um, but one of the big things that's so cheesy and corny is like having fun.
Yeah.
Like how many times I'm sure you know, like if you're really in a hardcore prep or you're really focused on this goal, are you more focused on the goal and you kind of lose track of having fun along the way, right? And then you get the goal and you're like, yeah, I'm sure you have a moment where you're pumped, but once again, I think that automatically goes to the next goal,
Yeah.
right? And then it's like, well, that's going to keep happening and happening and happening. Are you having fun doing it? like if you are doing something that you're having fun, one, time goes by real quick. You're going to enjoy it more. You're going to want to show up more. But you see people who do things that aren't fun, and we're talking more, and it could be competitive, but it could be Gen Pop. But if you're a Gen Pop person and you're not enjoying this crap, like what the heck are you doing, dude? Like
Yeah.
that is actually a huge chunk out of your life, right? And I know that there are some extremes where like people have fun and they focus on the end goal. And I hope and pray that it's everything that they want when they achieve it. Because if it's not, you're going to really find yourself in a really weird mental place. I've been there. I see it happening. So I don't know, man. I don't know. I know it's not a great answer. I'm not
No,
sure how well
I think
I
from
did on this
there,
podcast, but you know,
yeah,
man, it's a journey,
the
bro. It's a journey.
yeah, 100%. You know, there's lots of things gone from there, and that's why, you know, the tangent that we've spoken about and gone through there, there's a lot more to it rather than, you know, I think originally, you know, you said there, you know, from your experiences, I know for myself, sometimes it's like, what's the best exercise? What's this? What's this? Whereas actually, you know, you zoom out a little bit. Well, what does strength mean to that person? Because it is a word that gets thrown around. You know, the podcast is called Strength Chat, but it's kind of like, what does that mean to that person? I want to be able to put my shopping up higher. I want to be able to play with my kids. I want to be able to do that. And it's kind of digging that to be like, look, you know, again, you know, what does that what does that what does that look like? What does that mean? And then that way you match the training. Whereas, you know, like what we said earlier in the chat, sometimes people are following one direction, whereas actually they're actually getting further away than what's actually really important to them. And you know, I think our chat here is more towards kind of like the general population. I know, you know, there's powerlifters, strongman lifting. Yes, you know, that's because you're competing in a sport. You need to be able to need to be able to go from there. Whereas if you're somebody who's maybe like a little bit lost in the gym, it's like, well, what is it that you want to be for? And it goes right back to what you said at the start, which is, you know, what is your why? Why is it you want to do that? What's your purpose to do that? And it does your training make you capable to do what you want to do. I thought that was a really good thing that you touched on right at the start. Thanks a lot, Joy, for taking the time to jump on. Really enjoyed chatting with you today. For everyone listening who might have any questions about what we've spoken about today, want to reach out to you or see the content that you share, where could people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, so basically everything is going to be under Zat Strength, SZAT, the word strength. You can just Google it. You know, I got a YouTube channel, I got Instagram, I got podcasts myself, other people, all that goodies. But yeah, you just type in the name, you'll find access to any of my content. You know, YouTube, I got like over 1,000 videos. I've been doing that for a long time. So depending on where you're at in your training journey, some of those videos are definitely going to hit home more than others. But that's what it is, man. Like I said, it's a journey. I would say for anybody getting into it, make it just a lifestyle that you're going to do for the long haul. And if you can kind of reframe your brain to understand what that entails, you're going to be in a far better place than focusing on the short-term goals or progress that you're looking for. Because if you truly want the max and best out of this, it's going to be a long haul over a consistent period of time. And I suggest you find a way to make that fun and enjoyable while you're going through it, or else there's no point doing it. But yeah, man, that's where you can find me. And I just appreciate your time having me on here and letting me kind of rant and riff on some outside weird philosophical topics. But I do think they're valuable for things, you know, or for people to consider these things and think a little bit more big picture than be so narrow focused on, the minutia or the short term perspective of it.
100%. And yeah, you know, I appreciate you taking the time to jump on. Like I say, I thought there was some really good content information for there because, yeah, I think topics like this, it's just a different conversation as opposed to let's just talk about this program. This is the program that you need to follow. But I think there's a lot more to it. So yeah, thanks a lot, Joey, for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will catch you all at the next episode.